Good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are joining us from. Thank you for joining the WCRC webinar today. My name is Nassar, and I serve as the Executive Secretary for Mission and Advocacy at the World Communion of Reformed Churches. It is really my privilege to moderate today's important conversation with our Palestinian brothers and sisters in the fourth and the final week of the campaign focusing on Ush Ghurab in partnership with Kairos Palestine. Over the past 4 weeks, our communion has been centering the story of Ush Ghurab, a plateau in the Bethlehem governorate whose fate is inseparable from the survival of one of the oldest Palestinian Christian community. But to understand the question of Ush Ghurab, we must first name what is happening across the occupied West Bank. Israeli settlement expansion has accelerated at a pace without precedent in recent decades. In 2024 alone, plans were advanced for nearly 29,000 housing units across the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. By the close of 2025, the Israeli cabinet had approved the construction of 103 new settlements, including a single batch of 34, the largest approved in decades. This is not a passive expansion. A UN report covering 12 months up till October 2025 documented over 1,700 incidents of settler violence, finding that Israeli authorities played a central role in directing, in participating in, or enabling these attacks. October 2025 alone recorded the highest monthly number of settler incidents since documentation began in 2006, an average of 8 attacks every single day. So the question of Israeli settlements is also a question of not only simply occupying land. They sever communities from one another. They restrict movement. They cut access to water and services. They demolish houses and create coercive environmental design to make Palestinian life on that land unsustainable. Beit Sahour sits at the heart of this pressure. This town, the Shepherd's Fields town, where the angels announce the birth of Christ, is home to a Palestinian Christian community that now accounts for less than 1% of the whole West Bank population. Settlement construction has encircled on all sides. A planned expansion of the illegal settlements of Ma'ali Adumim threatens to sever the West Bank in two. And within this already suffocating geography, Ush Ghurab stands as the last substantial reserve of public land available to Beit Sahour. Today's webinar takes up that question of settlement expansion, of international law, and the Church's responsibility to respond. I would like to invite the World Communion of Reformed Churches General Secretary, Reverend Vinod Peacock, to open up the webinar with a prayer, and I will then introduce our honorable speakers in due course. Philip, over to you.
Thank you, Muna. Dear friends and colleagues from across the world, I bring you greetings from the World Communion of Reformed Churches and from our president, the Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson. The WCRC is a global Christian communion of Reformed, Presbyterian, Congregational, First Reformation, and United and Uniting churches. We are 231 member churches in 109 countries, representing 100 million Christians. At the WCRC, we believe we are called to communion and committed to justice. This means we are called to stand where God stands, with the wounded, the vulnerable, and the crucified. Today, in no uncertain terms, that means standing with the Palestinians. They are being systematically annihilated, cruelly and openly before the eyes of the world. This genocide is being televised. As Christians, we are called to stand with the Palestinians, not only because of the divine mandate to stand with the crucified, but even more so because Christian theology itself is being invoked to justify and legitimize their suffering. And we are witnesses to a dwindling Christian presence in the very land where Jesus walked. In 1945, Christians made up 10% of the population. Today, they are less than 1%. In our webinar today, we will hear from the Christians of Beit Sahour, the place of the shepherd's field, just outside Bethlehem, now under threat of occupation by Israel. We will hear from our Executive Secretary, Nassar, our close friends and partners, Rifat Kassis and Munther Isaac, Dalia Qumsieh, founder and director of the Balasan Initiative for Human Rights, and the Honorable Mayor of Beit Sahour, Laith Qumsieh. A Christian presence in the Holy Land is not only a question of history, it carries strategic and ideological weight. In the struggle for Palestinian rights, the rhetoric has too often been framed in the logic of Islamophobia, setting Israel against Muslim Arabs. Palestinian Christians disrupt that logic, and so the removal serves the logic of domination and empire. This is why we gather, to listen, to bear witness, and to stand together. So before we begin, I would like to offer a word of prayer. Good Shepherd, you know each one of us by name, and you do not abandon your flock. We gather today mindful of Beit Sahour, the shepherd's field, where on a holy night shepherds heard the promise of peace on earth and goodwill among all people. We pray for this town and the people now, for a Christian community rooted in this land for generations, living under the threat of occupation and the loss of the very ground beneath their feet. As you led the shepherds to the manger, lead us to stand with them. In these difficult days, we lift all our people in Palestine, those who mourn, those who wait, those who work each day for peace with justice. Amid forcible displacement, genocide, and despair, may your voice be heard calling us into hope. We pray for the people of Gaza, those facing starvation and thirst, those fleeing death and burying their loved ones day after day, those who have lost hope in a world that has forgotten them and watches their suffering in silence. We pray for an end to their unprecedented pain and for the lifting of the injustice that weighs upon them. Open the minds and hearts of those who hold power, O God, that they may see that killing does not bring peace. Only your mercy, your love, and your justice can lead the world to true peace and the healing of humanity. We thank you for our partners around the world, including Kairos Palestine. Remind us that we are not alone. Grant us courage to stand firm, grace to speak truth, and faith to believe that justice will come. As the angels once sang over these fields, may peace come once again to this land and to all its people. In the precious name of our Lord and Savior we pray. Amen. And now over to my colleague, Nassar, our Executive Secretary, to introduce the speakers and continue this conversation.
Thank you, Philip. I would like now to have a word for our participant that we will hear from each of our speaker in turn, followed by questions at the end of the webinar. So I would ask our participant if they have questions for the speaker to post them in the chat box so that we can address them in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And now I would like to invite Mr. Rifat Kassis. Just a word of introduction about Rifat. Rifat is a Palestinian Christian human rights activist. He is an author and a speaker born in Beit Sahour. Rifat has over 30 years of experience in human rights, in development and advocacy across Palestine, the Middle East, Central Asia, and Europe. He has worked with the World Council of Churches, and with the Lutheran World Federation and with multiple ecumenical agencies, including Christian Aid and Dan Church Aid. In 1991, he founded Defense Children International, Palestine, and served as president of the International DCI movement for 2 terms. He is the general coordinator of Kairos Palestine, a partner of the World Communion of Reformed Churches. And today, Rifat, we will speak about the Ush Ghurab campaign, its purpose, its ask, and why the churches must be on board. Welcome, Rifat, and over to you.
Thank you, Mona. Dear sisters and brothers, allow me first to express my sincere gratitude to the WCRC and its staff, Philip and Mona and others, for their partnership with the people of Beit Sahour and for taking this initiative to launch this important campaign to protect and preserve the town's land and heritage. This initiative is not only about safeguarding a particular piece of land, it is also about affirming the presence, rights, and future of the local community. It provides an important opportunity for churches around the world to become active partners in a shared effort to uphold justice, protect vulnerable communities, and preserve the Christian presence in the Holy Land. In our first Kairos Palestine of 2009, we sent to the global churches a word of gratitude for the solidarity they have shown towards us in word, deed, and presence among us. However, we send them also a call to repentance, to revisit fundamentalist theological positions that support certain unjust political options with regard to the Palestinian people. It was a call to stand alongside the oppressed and preserve the word of God as good news for all, rather than to turn it into a weapon with which to slay the oppressed. We ask them also not to offer a theological cover-up for the injustice we suffer, for the sin of the occupation imposed upon us. Our question to our brothers and sisters in the churches was, are you able to help us get our freedom back? For this is the only way you can help the two people who to attain justice, peace, and security. And this brings us to the theme of our meeting today. At first glance, the topic of today's meeting, Ush Ghurab, may appear to be a local issue concerning a tract of land on the eastern edge of Beit Sahour. In reality, it is far more significant. The future of Ush Ghurab will have implications not only for Beit Sahour, but for Bethlehem and the wider Bethlehem district, and the long-term sustainability of the Christian presence in the land where Christianity was born. The purpose of Ush Ghurab campaign is to prevent the establishment of a new Israeli settlement in this area, to preserve the land for the development of the local Palestinian community, and to protect the territorial continuity and viability of the Bethlehem area. Our demands are straightforward. We call on churches, Christian and international organizations, and governments to protect and oppose Israeli measures that contribute to annexation and the confiscation of Ush Ghurab land, and to stand publicly alongside the people of Beit Sahour, whose future is directly affected by these policies. And we call for respect for international law and accountability regarding violations of human rights. To understand why Ush Ghurab matters, one must understand the geography of Bethlehem. Over the past decades, Bethlehem has become increasingly surrounded by Israeli settlements. The mayor will speak more about this. And the separation wall, of course. Land that once connected Bethlehem to Jerusalem has largely been cut off. Space for natural Palestinian growth has become increasingly restricted. You know, more than 85% of Bethlehem Governorate is designated as Area C, which is not under the control of the Palestinian Authority. It's about 60%. This is according to Oslo Agreement. Out of this 85%, only maybe less than 1% of this area approved by the Israeli occupation forces, allowing Palestinians to build legally. Only less than 1% even. In this context, Ush Ghurab represents one of the last significant areas available for the future development of Beit Sahour and the eastern side of Bethlehem. If a settlement established there, it would deepen the fragmentation of the Bethlehem district. It would further isolate Palestinian communities from one another, and it would further undermine the ability of local families to envision a future in the area for themselves and for their children. This is particularly significant for Beit Sahour. You know, for the ones who don't know Beit Sahour, Beit Sahour remains one of the strongest centers of Palestinian Christian life. Its churches, schools, institutions, and civic organizations play an important role throughout Palestine. Its importance is not just for Bethlehem Governorate or district. For generations, Beit Sahour has been a model of community resilience, civic engagement, education, and peaceful resistance. We are known to be the civil disobedience city, where in 1989 we rejected paying our taxes to the occupiers. Beit Sahour has contributed to the Palestinian civil society, Christian witness, and struggle for justice and peace. When the future of Beit Sahour is threatened, the implications reach far beyond its municipal boundaries. The challenge facing Palestinian Christians today is whether conditions exist that allow Christian communities to remain, grow, and flourish. Young families do not leave because of a single event. This is one of our strongest problems today. People are leaving. They leave when opportunities diminish, when land becomes inaccessible, when movement becomes restricted, when housing becomes unaffordable, and when confidence in the future gradually erodes. Every new settlement expansion contributes to these pressures. Every additional restriction on Palestinian development narrows the horizon for future generations. This is why Ush Ghurab matters. Churches, therefore, have compelling reasons to become involved. First, churches have a responsibility toward the living Christian communities of the Holy Land. Too often, international attention focuses on sacred sites. We said that the dead stones, while overlooking the guardians of faith, the people who continue to worship, serve, and bear witness in those places today. The Christian presence in Palestine is not simply a historical inheritance. It is a living reality. It deserves support, not because it is fragile, but because it remains an essential part of the universal church. And second, churches have a responsibility to uphold justice and human dignity, as Philip said in his introduction. The question of Ush Ghurab is fundamentally a question about rights, the right of a community to develop, the right of families to remain on their land, and the right of people to live with dignity and security. Supporting these rights is not a political preference. It is not radical. It is not extreme. It is consistent with long-standing Christian commitments to justice, human dignity, and peace. And third, churches have a responsibility to protect the possibility of a just and lasting peace. Settlements expansion does not bring peace closer. It makes a future solution more difficult by creating facts on the ground that further fragment Palestinian territory and undermine prospects for a viable political solution. Those who care about reconciliation and peace must also care about the conditions that make peace possible. And finally, churches have a unique capacity to influence public discourse. All the time, churches spoke about themselves as weak institutions. On the contrary, churches have the capacity to educate millions of people. They shape moral reflection. They engage governments and decision makers. They can help communities distinguish between political narratives and lived realities. Their voice matters, and their engagement matters, but also their silence also matters. The churches are not being asked to take sides against the people, but they are asked to stand for principles and for justice. The Ush Ghurab campaign deserves international church support because it concerns the sustainability, as Muna said, of one of the world's oldest Christian communities. To conclude, history offers sobering lessons about the cost of church silence in the face of injustice. During the Holocaust, many churches later claimed they did not fully understand the scale of Nazi persecution, despite years of public discrimination, deportations, and warnings from these directly affected, from the victims, from the Jews themselves. In South Africa, numerous churches either supported apartheid or remained neutral, only later acknowledging that their silence helped sustain a system of racial oppression. And we have some South Africans friends among us today. Similar patterns emerged under military dictatorships in Latin America, during the Rwandan genocide, and in other contexts where churches received repeated warnings from victims but failed to respond with sufficient courage and clarity. Again and again, history has shown that the issue was rarely the absence of information. No one can claim that we don't know. It was the unwillingness to confront uncomfortable truths and the fear of the consequences of speaking out. In 2017, we issued the open letter to the ecumenical family. We spoke about, forget about the shallow diplomacy. We need prophetic voice of the church. For decades, Palestinian Christians have been warning churches around the world about the systematic dispossession and oppression of our people, the confiscation of our land, the expansion of settlements, and the growing threat to the Christian presence in the land of Christ. The proposed settlement in Beit Sahour is not an isolated incident, but part of a wider reality that has been extensively documented and repeatedly communicated to church leaders and congregations worldwide. Therefore, when future generations look back and ask what the churches did while Palestinian Christians were being pushed from their homeland, we did not know will not be a credible answer. The facts have been shared, televised, as Philip said. The testimonies have been given, and the appeals have been made. The question is not whether the churches know, but whether they will act. If they choose silence, they should not be surprised if their children and grandchildren ask why they ignored the plea of fellow Christians, why they remained passive in the face of discrimination and dispossession, and whether their silence made them complicit in this genocide and ethnic cleansing, in an injustice, they had the power and the responsibility to challenge. And thank you.
Thank you, Rifat. Thank you for this courageous plea, but also I wanted to highlight a sentence that you said, that families are leaving. They leave when opportunities diminish, when land becomes inaccessible, and when confidence in the future gradually erodes. So I think that's a powerful, realistic, also everyday reminder of how the settlements really affect the daily life of the communities where they are living. So thank you for that. For the next speaker, I would like to invite the mayor of Beit Sahour, Mr. Laith Qumsieh. Mr. Laith Qumsieh is the newly elected mayor of Beit Sahour as of last month. He is the mayor of Beit Sahour, the town of the shepherd's field, the very ground where angels announced the birth of Christ to shepherds. It is the home of one of the oldest continuously inhabited Christian communities, a community that has kept faith and witnessed in that land for 2,000 years, and which today faces an existential threat to its very own survival. Welcome to this webinar, Mr. Laith, and Mr. Laith will be talking to us about the local dimension of what the settlement expansion really means for the people living in Beit Sahour and for the own community of Beit Sahour. Welcome, Mr. Laith, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Muna. Thanks for all the speakers, and thanks for all the participants that have taken the time, their time to come and listen to us and know what's happening in Palestine, especially in Beit Sahour nowadays, in Ush Ghurab. Let me start by telling you the present situation in Ush Ghurab. Sadly, we woke on Saturday morning on a military order of confiscating around 100 dunams of land used to be of municipality land, let's talk. And usually when we talk about land being confiscated, we think about an unused land or an empty land. These lands, these places is not unused. For the last 20 years, our municipality has invested a lot in these lands. We made public parks, we made a theater, we made a small zoo, also even a dog shelter. We have sports fields, and we have places for people to go gather with their families in the last after work or when they can. So these lands are not unused. When we work on this military order, we were sad, and unfortunately, they're expanding the new settlement they're trying to build. Around these areas, all of the land all of the Beit Sahourian people used to farm. Historically, Beit Sahour citizens used to be farmers, and this eastern side of the city is the last known reserves of land. Most of the other spaces have building nowadays, so these lands are majority used as places to farm their lands. And nowadays, people are restricted to access these lands. They're restricted to farm these lands. Let me talk about a cousin of mine named Naji Morkos. He was usually in this time of year we grow a fruit named fakus. We are famous of doing that, and he tried to do it as every year he do it. This year he couldn't do that because of the harassment of the settlers. Also, people has some old houses. They used to go there and use the houses. Let me talk. My friend named Majdi Khair. They went there, they put Israeli flags on it, and they tell him not to come back to this house. I'm just giving you some examples of things that happen. Also, a citizen named Walid Gharib was beaten by a settler, telling him not to come back on these lands. So this eastern side of Beit Sahour nowadays has restricted access, or if you go there, you are being harassed. The third thing I want to talk about is the movement constraints and spatial fragmentation of some of our houses, and also we have an evangelical school, an American evangelical school after the settlement, or the so-called settlement. As you all know, there are some gates all over the West Banks. Nowadays, they put 2 gates to restrict access for the Palestinians, so as they can move around freely for themselves. And this school, and also some of our local residents and the eastern side, nowadays they have restricted or sometimes to go, and they can go or they can't go. So we're having problems with the school itself and also with some of the inhabitants on that area. So all of this is giving us some growing safety concern for our residents in Beit Sahour, because most people around it are not used to seeing settlers moving around with guns and trying to harass people, telling them not to go in here and not to go there. So this general insecurity and settler harassment is making some social pressure and some psychological problem for a lot of people, which in turn are telling people, as my colleague said, are telling people, or people are now thinking of leaving or immigrating somewhere else. So this is actually a problem. Because as a new elected mayor, my main concern is keeping the people of Beit Sahour in Beit Sahour, especially in these hard times, because people, if they can't provide for their families, we have around Beit Sahour like a blockade. We are blocked from all sides. Let me talk about if the settlement expands, or if the settlement stays or expands its growth, we're going to have a problem like the settlement of, they call it Har Huma. We used to call it Jabal Abu Ghnaim. It's a big park, used to be of Beit Sahour land. In 1996, they started a settlement there, and they closed it by the wall. This is to the north side of Beit Sahour, and it completely blocks us from expanding to the north side. And from the west side, we have Bethlehem. The south side also has a settlement. And to explain, we only have the eastern side to expand, or to go, or to expand our building, or to farm our lands. Nowadays, if this settlement be or expand, it will block us from the last place to expand, or to grow, or to have anything to do. So Beit Sahour is hoping that we can stop this settlement. We can let the people come back to their land, to farm their land, for the municipality to go back to its investments and all the places, the only places that citizens where to go and have some kind of fun, because all of the other places we don't own land anywhere else as a municipality to try to start investing. So we really hope that we can stop this and go back to a place of safety in Beit Sahour. Let me just talk one last thing about the broad economic pressure. The other thing, except farming, we used to have economics from is the tourism, because of the historical significance of Beit Sahour as the shepherd's field. Usually, tourism and tourists come to Beit Sahour and Bethlehem. Nowadays, if the settlement stays, usually the tourism comes from that road, from that side, from the eastern side. And if it comes and they try to block the tourism or tourists from coming to Beit Sahour, we'll lose about 50 to 60% of our income comes from the tourism industry. So another thing will happen to us is the economic devastation that will happen if this settlement stays and expand. Lastly, I want to just say one last thing. As I said, we need people to stay. We need the Christians to stay because this is their homeland. 80% of Beit Sahour of the Beit Sahour community is Christians. It's the largest community of the historical Palestine, of Christian community in historical Palestine. So we need people to stay. We need the Christians to stay. This is our land, and this is Christianity, the cradle of Christianity. So thank you for trying to help us keep the Christian people and our citizen here in Beit Sahour. Thank you.
Thank you to the mayor for this really powerful reality of how people are really by staying on the land they are resisting. When you trace the effects of land confiscation, taking away people's own economic resources of how they can make ends meet on a day-to-day basis. I think it's really hard to, it really sets the image of what really remaining on the land requires of people, and how the question of remaining in the land consists of many layers that are directly affecting people's livelihood with the settlement expansion. So thank you for that, and thank you for really identifying and naming people that we know personally that are being affected by this, because it's not just statistics of settlements, it's directly affecting people in our communities, people that we know, people that are directly affected by this. So thank you for that sobering realization as we listen to this. Our next speaker is Dalia Qumsieh. Dalia Qumsieh is a human rights lawyer. She specializes in legal human rights advocacy, and the founder and the director of the Balasan Initiative for Human Rights Palestine. She is a graduate of Birzeit University School of Law in Ramallah. She obtained her graduate degree in international law and international administration from the Law of School of University of Paris. Prior to establishing Balasan Initiative for Human Rights, she worked in various Palestinian human rights organizations as a senior legal advocacy consultant. Thank you so much, Dalia, for being part of this webinar. And I would like to give you the floor to talk to us about the legal implication of the settlement expansion and the international law in our day and how we view this. Welcome, Dalia.
Thank you. Thank you for the introductions, Muna, and for organizing this very important and very timely, I would say, webinar. I was asked to cover the legality, or rather the illegality of settlements under international law and accountability. But I believe it is crucial to first lay the foundations on the geographic context of this new settlement in Beit Sahour, which, by the way, the Israeli authorities formalized this week by assigning around 115 or 16, to be more accurate, dunams of Palestinian lands to the jurisdiction of this new settlement. And then, so understanding basically the geographic context to properly understand the purpose on the one hand and the ideology that drives it on the other, i.e. why this specific interest in settlements in Bethlehem and in Beit Sahour now, then we would be better fit to examine the state of absolute unlawfulness regarding the Israeli settlement policy. So this new settlement in Beit Sahour, so-called Yatzif, ironically meaning the strong and the steadfast, is part of intensified Israeli policies targeting the entirety of the eastern parts of Bethlehem, which are witnessing heavy and accelerated annexation policies, especially nowadays. And we know this from direct field documentation that what we are able to cover, which barely scratches the surface, to be honest. So, yes, Beit Sahour does have its particularities that the distinguished speakers spoke about before me, in the sense that it is currently the town where the largest remaining minority, that is the Palestinian Christians, and when I say minority, is by the numbers, not per indigeneity to the land and, being an integral part of the Palestinian population. But currently, large parts of the east of the Bethlehem governorate, we can say, are being de facto annexed. Since 2024, we have 2 military orders that have de facto annexed vast areas that are labeled areas B. If you look at the map, you will see that from the eastern peripheries of Bethlehem all the way to the Dead Sea, these are areas that are covered by one military order that de facto annexes the entirety of them. And then again, Area B, which post-October the 7th, we notice Israel's, I don't want to say new trend, because Israel has been indeed laying the foundations for annexation long before October the 7th. But since then, we have seen increased Israeli direct sovereignty into areas B. In the same areas of the East, we are witnessing excessive cases of settler terror and crimes on a daily basis. Part of them were just mentioned by the mayor of Beit Sahour. And we need to look at settler terror and violence for what it is and what it serves. It is an active tool of forced displacement. And it's working, it's ongoing on a daily basis, protected on every level by the Israeli highest political levels, and supported politically and financially. Moreover, we are witnessing increasing prohibitive movement restrictions and total closures of iron gates, more so in the East, and we will be publishing soon yet another update on movement restrictions in the Bethlehem governorate, with highlighting what's going on in the eastern parts of Bethlehem. Water resources are being deliberately reduced and cut off. 40% of the water allocated for the south of Bethlehem has been reduced since October the 7th, and it was in a bad place to begin with. So this is happening on a daily basis. We are being cut off from vital resources like water, which is directly connected to not only your basic livelihood, it's also your human dignity. So basically, this is ongoing systematically every day, and we are witnessing another alarming development, which is the Judaization of a very important archaeological site in the same area as the eastern parts of Bethlehem. Which we locally refer to as the Firdaus mountain, and they refer to as the Mount Herodion. which instead of being linked to Jesus's ministry in Bethlehem, it is being regarded as, proof that Jews did exist on this land, as if anyone is trying to deny that. But we have a very alarming new development that Israel has confiscated or started the process of confiscating 320 dunams of the land there to, quote unquote, as they say, develop the site. So, and all of this, and we haven't even begun to address what is going on in the rest of the Bethlehem governorate, which is incredibly alarming. But all of these violations are a daily occurrence and are active agents and tool of deliberate creation of a coercive environment, one that most certainly leads and is leading on a daily basis for people to leave. And this is what we legally refer to as forced displacement, because it can take form in the direct forced displacement way, that is using force to displace people, but also the deliberate creation of a coercive environment, one that leads people to seek dignity and safety, and fundamental rights elsewhere is also labeled as forced displacement, the indirect one, and both are equally illegal. So, and I also have to say that this falls in line with what Smotrich refers to as encouraging voluntary migration, and that is, again, the war crime of forced displacement, a grave violation and a grave breach of international law. Now, the new settlement in Beit Sahour comes in this context that I just described, and it aligns with a broader territorial engineering strategy aimed at consolidating Israel's control around Jerusalem throughout the West Bank. Now, this strategy includes the development of the Eastern Ring, is what they refer to it, which is a network of roads and settlement enclaves designed to connect Israeli settlements north and south of Jerusalem with Jerusalem itself, effectively creating a contiguous Israeli built-up area that encircles and isolates Palestinian neighborhoods and communities. Now, basically, needless to say, these roads and settlements are being used to basically create irreversible facts on the ground that preclude Palestinian territorial contiguity and basically deprive us from the right to self-determination and a whole wide set of other fundamental human rights, because they are all interconnected. This new settlement is being placed in 100 dunams of Beit Sahour strategic municipal land that has been earmarked for public facilities, as the mayor just explained. It included a children's hospital, recreational area, cultural center, green spaces, community hall. It basically, with this settlement, we only have about 7% of Beit Sahour's administrative land that remains so far accessible for building. Now, one of the main challenges we face when we talk about new settlements is explaining what the multi-layered system of violations that any settlement entail. It's not just, for example, in Beit Sahour and in other places where you have settlements, the problem is not only the 30 erected caravans and the 13 settler families living illegally on occupied territory, that is Beit Sahour in this case, which is a grave breach and it's even classified as a war crime, the settlements. But also we have a wide set of Israeli military orders that has sought to ensure de facto annexation besides the new illegal settlements and before it, from land seizures to land confiscation to building bans, blanket building bans in the areas, and demolition orders, where we have currently in this area 18 active and pending demolition orders. Currently there are, the seizure orders that are in place, including the one on the main street, some of them date back as early as the late 60s, 68 and 70s and 80s, which basically reflects the intention for this area since then, and have been renewed ever since then up to this day. So basically, this is, I mean, you will hear about all kinds of justifications, but if this reflects anything, and I know annexation now is something everyone's talking about in the West Bank, but this is when we say annexation has been the Israeli objective from the outset. Since then, these are the evidence that we use. It's ensuring permanent control of an occupying power of occupied territory. And this is what de facto annexation is. Now, I spoke about the ideology, like why Bethlehem in general, why Beit Sahour nowadays in specific. On the one hand, there's an Israeli ideology that perceives Bethlehem as an integral part of what they define and refer to as Greater Jerusalem. And it is deeply tied to what they refer to, the settlers, as their return to Jerusalem. This was manifestly stated in the inauguration process of the settlement in Beit Sahour in January of this year, which has been celebrated by Israeli officials and settlers as a great achievement. And they considered it even as an overdue return to Bethlehem. I will read a quote from the inauguration process that was said by Rosenthal. He's the head of the Gush Etzion Regional Council. And he said, I think that the establishment of the settlement here, right on the outskirts of the city of Bethlehem, reminds us that returning home will only be possible if we return to the city of Bethlehem. From there, we were displaced 2,000 years ago, and from there, we were displaced 30 years ago. This is the direct quote from the head of the Gush Etzion Regional Council. I mean, this is very reflective of the ideology driving the intensified settlement activity nowadays. Bethlehem for them is a tool to ensure the full return. It cannot be done without it. So if I want to move on to the legality aspect, I mean, this is a compounded state of unlawfulness, really. Everything that the distinguished speakers before me spoke about, and everything I barely started describing in the time allocated for me in this presentation, shows you that there's a situation of an illegality over an illegality over illegality. Each and every policy on its own described here, be it speaking about settlements, be it annexation, house demolition, land confiscation, forced displacement, settler violence that is protected and used as, that is basically a state mechanism that is state-sponsored. All of these are grave breaches and violations. Some of them amount to war crimes. The illegality is manifest and it is crystal clear under international law. But when they all operate together in the same time and over the same territory, the same land, the same tiny space of land, that is the West Bank overall, but really in Beit Sahour, which is also occupied territory, the unlawfulness takes a whole other level, and it's pretty much compounded. Now, as I said, all of these, they're not only manifest violations on their own, compounded altogether, but they violate systematically as parts of systems a whole set of fundamental rights that are Palestinian rights, but not so for Jewish Israeli settlers residing illegally on the same land. And when I say a whole wide set of fundamental rights that are being violated as a result of what settlements are, again, they're not only the buildings that are being erected on occupied territory, they come with whole systems, buffer zones, increased militarized areas, settlers, which are, as the presentations of the former speakers demonstrated. I mean, the settlement is new, but the settlers are already spreading a severe environment of terror and intimidation among the residents of Beit Sahour. So back to the point, the right of self-determination and a whole wide set of other fundamental rights are being directly impacted by this settlement and as a result of what it presents. our children cannot go to school because there are checkpoints now because of this settlement, and linked to it. We can no longer move between Palestinian city and even within small towns like Beit Sahour itself nowadays as a result of these settlements. Think of each and every mundane daily daily decisions to the big life decisions that are basically dictated by this kind of setting that is the settlements. So basically, yeah, these are not only buildings, these are entire systems of oppression. And to speak about the legality without being too technical, I mean, we refer a lot to the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion from July 2024, which spoke about, and emphasis added on the title, legal consequences arising from Israel's presence in the Israeli policies in the occupied Palestinian territory. And the result is crystal clear. What the court said is that the occupation, Israel's presence, very presence in the OPT is unlawful. And it placed a lot of responsibility on member states to basically put an end to these atrocious violations that have been taking place systematically over decades and are worsening in their numbers and in their scales, all the way where we have reached to a situation of genocide in Gaza and full-fledged annexation in the West Bank. Now, when we speak about churches do have leverage. They have significant leverage. We refuse that to believe that they don't. So, and they have the leverage to pressure their own governments to uphold international law on the one hand, and on the other to align themselves with international law as institutions, which means as basically the church as an institution should make sure that its faith is clean from Christian Zionism, its investments are clean from investing in settlements and these kinds of partnerships. It must stand in significant and meaningful solidarity, because solidarity is the verb, it's not thoughts and prayers only. They have to always be accompanied by meaningful action. Now, as church-affiliated audiences, it is important to be concerned for the dwindling number of Palestinian Christians, and the distinguished speakers before me, they rang the alarm bell about the significantly declining numbers of Palestinian Christians, and for the right reasons. The ones who left and the ones who are leaving because they have completely lost the hope that tomorrow will be a better place, or tomorrow will be, if it was, difficult times, that, will improve in a few days or in a few years, people would be steadfast. But the moment they leave is the moment they absolutely lose hope. But the point is, we should be concerned that Christians are leaving, especially in the case of Beit Sahour. But, however, please do focus and stand in meaningful solidarity with the ones who want to remain and to want to stay. So to do that, there's absolutely no way around accountability and ensuring accountability, and there is no alternative to accountability. I mean, from our documentation in the field, we know one thing for sure, is that Israel will not stop because of a statement or of a prayer. However, meaningful sanctions that are in line with international law, which is crystal clear in the unlawfulness of all of these policies and violations, it will stop, it should stop as a result of taking coordinated and targeted sanction in line with international law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dalia, for your description of and for laying out the illegality, as you put it, of the Israeli settlement expansion, while also explaining the de facto annexation added layer to it now. But also thank you for making it visible how the agency of the Palestinian people are being taken away one aspect after another from their daily lives and from their dailighoods. So beyond, explaining the illegality, I think it was really important for people to understand how, again, it affects the daily life of the people, but also it affects the future of people living in Palestine amidst the question of settlement. So thank you so much, Dalia, for that. Our next speaker is Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac. He is a Palestinian Christian pastor. He is a theologian, an author, and he is also born in Beit Sahour. He is a pastor of the Hope Evangelical Lutheran Church in Ramallah and serves as a director of the Bethlehem Institute for Peace and Justice. He holds a PhD from the Oxford Center for Mission Studies and is the author of several books, including The Other Side of the Wall and most recently, Christ in the Rubble. Munther became an internationally recognized voice for Palestinian dignity and justice when in 2023, his Christmas Nativity sermon went viral, and it was accompanied by a plea to the global church to hold them for moral accountability. Munther today continues to speak and write with prophetic clarity at the intersection of Palestinian experience, liberation theology, and ecumenical witness. Thank you so much, Munther, for joining our webinar today. And Munther will be speaking about the theological perspective of what conflating our Christian witness to justify oppression will look like and is looking like. So welcome, Munther, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Muna, and greetings, friends. Thank you for joining us in this important webinar. And I will be concluding the three exceptional talks that illustrated the problem clearly with a brief theological reflection that I hope grounds our response, at least theologically, as the Church of Christ in this land, on this earth. And I would like to begin my reflection by taking you to a normal Palestinian village, maybe in a normal day. Try to imagine this scene, which actually is a true story from a village here near Ramallah, when one morning, a group of Israeli settlers arrived with their livestock and began grazing their animals on land belonging to a Palestinian family, in this case, a Palestinian Christian family. And again, this is a true story. These scenes are becoming very familiar across the West Bank now. And in our experience, as happened in Beit Sahour, when settlers enter a field in this way, it signals a simple, it's often the first step in a process meant to assert control over the land. It's an act of intimidation intended to establish a new reality on the ground. And in that incident, the mother of the family saw what was happening and went on to confront them. She told them plainly that this was her land, that it belonged to her family. But instead of leaving, the settlers actually beat her. She was later taken to hospital intensive care unit for 2 days. Her son, when he witnessed the assault on his mother, he rushed forward to defend her. And in the struggle that followed, he aggressively pushed the settlers away. So the confrontation ended, but only briefly, because the settlers soon returned, this time accompanied by the Israeli soldiers. And when the soldiers arrived, they did not arrest the settlers who had attacked the woman. Instead, they came after the son. His crime was defending his land and protecting his mother from violence. And I'd like to pause and try to imagine for a moment, what if that confrontation between the settlers and the son was more violent? And what if the settlers were harmed? Thankfully, they weren't. Not only would the soldiers destroy or demolish the house of the Palestinian, probably church leaders will issue statements saying that Israel has the right to defend itself and condemn the Palestinian, because that has been our experience for years. When the settlers and soldiers came to make the arrest, the young man was not home. They began searching the nearby houses in the area, which consisted largely of family homes scattered among the fields. They eventually came to the door of another house belonging to the family, a home where a young woman with her husband and their children was living. And she's married to the brother of that man they were trying to arrest. The soldiers and the settlers together confronted her, demanded that she opens the door. And she hesitated because she knew from experience if they enter the house, they will arrest her son. So she refused. And they responded by smashing the glass window in the door. They pointed the gun at her, so she opened. And in that moment, when she opened instinctively, without thinking, she made the sign of the cross. And that's when they recognized that this family was a Christian. And as a result, one of the settlers told her, "Why are you here? You're Christian. Go to France." Is the irony, settlers probably coming from Europe telling us, the indigenous people, to go to France. And then he said, "Haven't you read the Torah? God gave us the land." This is the kind of religious ideology we're dealing with. Religious fanatics harming people in their homes, guided by this religious fanaticism and sense of divine entitlement. God gave us the land. And I'm sure that this audience knows too well that there are many, sadly, tragically, many Christians who share this belief. And because of that belief, violence becomes not only permitted, but encouraged. And so what we're dealing with on one level is this kind of religious fanaticism and sense of entitlement. And again, this is not something new in our land, but also in Scripture. Believe it or not, the Bible talks about land confiscation. And here I would like to take us back to the Old Testament, not to find Scripture about divine entitlement and privilege, but to talk about justice. And one of the most compelling biblical narratives illustrating the meaning of land, inheritance, and the centrality of justice is the story of Naboth and Ahab in 1 Kings 21, a story that has become central in Palestinian liberation theology and first highlighted by Reverend Naim Atiq in his book, Towards a Palestinian Theology of Liberation. If we look at that story for us Palestinians is very familiar. It talks about land confiscation in the name of supremacy and entitlement. That narrative exposes the moral dangers inherent in political power when it is severed from any sense of moral, ethical accountability. And in fact, Scripture gives this episode a lot of centrality in Scripture. It's actually a long narrative in comparison to many other narratives. You know the story. Ahab, back then the king of the northern kingdom, coveted a vineyard belonging to Naboth, the Jezreelite. And Ahab as king assumes that royal authority and financial capacity and power entitled him to acquire it. His logic was, might is right. I am a king, maybe appointed by God. And he first offered to purchase the vineyard. We know that what that means, giving Naboth an offer he cannot refuse. Naboth, however, refused. And notice what he said when he refused. He said, "The Lord forbids that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." This is a very important response. The Lord forbids that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. Naboth's response reveals a profound understanding of land as inheritance, as an endowment from our ancestors, as a source for the good of our community. It's not to be sold. It's not for our profit. It's not our individual possession to do with it whatever we want. This is the land of our ancestors. And when he said, "This is the land of my fathers," Naboth wasn't referring to ancient promises. He was talking, this is the land he inherited from his ancestors, one generation after the other. We know the story that Ahab became furious, upset. His wife, Queen Jezebel, intervened, and she said, "You are entitled as king to get this land." And through calculated deception and judicial manipulation, again, this is, shocking to me that history keeps repeating itself. We have so many unjust laws in the land that enable land confiscation. Jezebel orchestrated Naboth's death and enabled Ahab to seize the property. So here we see power and legality are weaponized. Authority is exercised not to protect inheritance, but to take it away from those it belongs to. And Naboth becomes the victim of a system in which might determines right. This is precisely actually why today we as Palestinians are extremely afraid. You know, had this story happened, the story of the settlement in Beit Sahour 20, 30 years ago, you might have expected mass mobilization of the people to go to the land to protect it. Today, we cannot do this because we know we will be shot without any accountability from anybody. We know that might has not only become right, we look that there is no accountability whatsoever. We see currently Israel acts as a state above the international law. They know they can never be held accountable. And that's why they're doing these acts. The story reveals a stark contrast between Naboth and Ahab. And that contrast, I think, reveals the contrast that exists today between Palestinians and Israelis and how we view the land. One thinks of land as an entitlement, possession. One thinks of it as an inheritance. And I always say there's a difference between when Palestinians and Israelis say, this is our land. When Israelis say this is our land, they would refer to ancient texts and promises thousands of years ago to get a sense of entitlement. When Palestinians say this is our land, we mean this is land we farmed and inherited for generations upon generations upon generations. We know every bit in that land. We know every tree, who planted it, and where it came from. And this is the difference that exists today. Now, the story does not stop there, as we know, because the story ends in divine judgment. There was a confrontation that we need to pay attention to between the prophet Elijah and Ahab. Elijah confronts Ahab and says, "Thus says the Lord, have you killed and also taken possession?" And then he tells him, in the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, shall dogs lick up your blood. Have you killed and taken possession? There is a clear judgment, albeit postponed, on those who commit injustice, on those who take advantage of the vulnerable, on those who exploit the poor, the marginalized. There is clear divine judgment. And that judgment is an essential part of the story. Justice is an essential character of God. And if I'm honest and transparent, it's a question of faith now. Do we still hold to that faith that God is a God of justice, that he's not neutral? Because justice in this land has been postponed and delayed for too long. And it's a strong test, to be honest, to our faith, to our endurance as Palestinians. How long can we continue to hold to these ideals, including that of nonviolence? But the story pushes us to continue that faith because it reminds us that God is not neutral. God is clear where he stands. This is a clear message that if God takes sides, then so should we. And in this story, I see God taking sides, not merely with a dispute about individuals, but this is about a system. There is an ideology of entitlement, displacement, and domination that's being condemned clearly in this story. And that is what must be named, confronted, and resisted. Because God in the Bible is the God of justice. He stands with Naboth. In other words, he stands against those systems of oppression. Today, I actually pray and feel we need more people like Elijah, more prophetic voices who speak truth and confront injustice like Elijah. Elijah's response was firm, courageous, and prophetic. He spoke truth. He was not afraid of the king. Elijah did not issue a statement saying he is concerned. He did not say, as a man of faith and as the church, I stay neutral and I pray for both sides that they reconcile. Thank God for that witness of Elijah, a witness that we need today in the face of so many of the lukewarm responses from churches who hide behind fake neutrality. I hope we recover this prophetic courage of Elijah that speaks truth, that names things. Because when it comes to settler violence, if we treat the settlers as the problem, we are missing the bigger picture. Because settlers, as we heard, are not merely acting with impunity, they are part of the system. And when Palestinians try to defend themselves, as I shared in the first story, they are arrested, targeted, sometimes even killed. While settlers, of course, are always protected. The soldiers are not neutral. Settlers, in this case, functions as agent of the state implementing the settler colonial plan and agenda of Israel. So let's not treat the settlers as fringe. This is structural. What we are witnessing is a settler colonial reality and ideology that seeks displacement and domination. That system has a name, it's Zionism, and it's way beyond time that the church confronts that system for what it is, an ideology of colonialism and racism. Today, Zionism talks through their governments and spokesmen like Smotrich about encouraging migration. And this settlement in Beit Sahour is one more step in this encouraging migration, this ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the West Bank that will actually target the most vulnerable Palestinian Christians. So I pray that churches act with this prophetic courage that Elijah had. And I thank many of you in this call who have always shown solidarity with us, because we need this solidarity more than ever. Please speak on our behalf. Please reach out. Please call things for their name. Mobilize churches, politicians. Do whatever it can to stop this episode of injustice from taking place in our land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Munther, for really deconstructing the theological layers that these settlers' attacks and settlers' expansions have shown, that it is really an ideology of superiority and must be named and confronted, as you say. I think it's also important to, as you said, that we do not treat the settlers as a problem, but that we deal with the root causes of the settler system that is really enabling these settlers to really expand the colonial plan and the agenda of Israel. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for the four panelists and their very sobering, really, testimony and witness to the reality of the settlements on their own lives and in their own communities and context. Our participants in the webinar have had a question posted in the Q&A section. And there is some of the questions that really, I think, Munther answered when there is a question about what can the municipality and the churches do to really mobilize against the settler expansion. And I think also, Munther, you answered that saying that in this context and in this climate, any sense of mobilization or being on the ground will be really replied with military attacks and being shot, basically. There is another question that was really posed about the international law and accountability, that today the UK government announced sanctions on 6 organizations supporting settlements. There is a question of how can these legal and political development be used to amplify the case of Ush Ghurab, and what are the specific asks of this campaign to political leaders? This is a question to our panelists.
I mean, maybe I can try on how this is linked to Ush Ghurab. Ush Ghurab is basically a settlement very much embedded in the entirety of the settlement enterprise, with the settlers, the state sponsorship in terms of the funding, the approval, as we say, as I mentioned today, allocating the jurisdiction area, which is occupied Palestinian territory, lands of Beit Sahour. And I might say, while it is good to see the UK sanctions, I mean, I'm not going to comment a lot about how delayed they came, but it's good to remind that a few settler organizations and a few, what they call them, radical settlers, is not going to change much. We need to really look at the root causes of the settlements and what they are. The entirety of the world perceives settlements as, you know, a grave breach, a violation of international law, and a war crime. In Israel, in the quasi-constitutional law in Israel, they are referred to as a national value, and they are acted upon as a national value. The allocation, the funding for the settlement, governmental allocation, has skyrocketed this year. A significant increase for settlement funding, and inciting the settlers, protecting them with almost full impunity as they commit their crimes. We have seen the government and top political levels in Israel not only disseminating free weapons, 150,000 pieces of weapon, but also relaxing gun licensing for the settlers. And the outcomes of this is that we have almost 800 settler militias. These are self-formed militias. And if you see how this translates on the ground, it is an absolute disaster. Sanctions against radical settlers, which makes you think that the problem is radical settlers, but the non-radical settlers are okay, is very problematic in the logic and in its sense. I think settlements are state-sponsored and are state mechanisms, and you cannot sanction the settlements without sanctioning what enables, why the settlements exist in the first place. And they are, you know, an integral part of Israel.
Thank you, Dalia. And I think there is a question as well, if you can really also type the quotation that you quoted in your speech about the return home, for one of the participants is asking for that, so that would be good. Yeah.
Yes, and I want to say that we use this quotation for an urgent appeal that we submitted for the UN for covering this new settlement on Beit Sahour and its impacts on the last remaining Palestinian Christian presence, which is centered in Beit Sahour nowadays. And the document that we had many terrible quotes. We quoted this one that reflects, you know, the ideology behind the settlement in Bethlehem. I have it here. Just give me a sec to take it out. So the quote is by Rosenthal, the head of the Gush Etzion Regional Council, and it was delivered on January 20th, 2026, pardon. So, and it says, I think, the quote starts with, I think that the establishment of the settlement here, meaning in Beit Sahour, right on the outskirts of the city of Bethlehem, reminds us that returning home will only be possible if we return to the city of Bethlehem. From there, we were displaced 2,000 years ago. And from there, we were displaced 30 years ago. When he talks about 30 years ago, he's talking about the military outpost that was occupied by Israeli soldiers, which was abandoned 30 years ago. And then them coming back to it is what he calls the return. So I hope this answers the question. And if you're interested in reading the appeal, which has a lot more information, and it was submitted to the UN special procedures, 5 special rapporteurs, and the Commission of Inquiry, you can find it on our website. Maybe I can leave a link to it in the chat.
Thank you, Dalia. And tomorrow we will be having a statement about the webinar, and we will include all the links and all the resources that our panelists also have used so that people can make use of that. We have another question about the solidarity beyond the Christian community. How does the church ensure that advocacy for Palestinian Christians is understood as advocacy as well for all Palestinians, Muslims and Christians alike, who face displacement? And what does genuine solidarity across faith lines looks like, both theologically and practically?
Maybe I can try answer this question.
Please go ahead, Rifat.
Actually, in all our statements and deliberations, we insist that we are an integral part of the Palestinian society. We are not just talking about Christians. First and foremost, we suffer the same oppression, the same disposition. All Palestinian people are suffer. So this is something very important. Second thing, we do believe that interfaith, if it's really directed to justice, interfaith dialogue, I mean, and connections and relations, if it's directed to struggle against injustice, this can make also a breakthrough. And we, all the time, we encourage our supporters and our friends to work together with other faith groups. We have some good connections with the Christian faith. We have also some good connections with Jewish groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and others, and we try to cooperate with them on this matter. So, I mean, interfaith work is equally important, just like other advocacy mobilization, which we also encourage churches to do. We encourage them to mobilize, to use all tools in their hands to encourage their congregants, their faithful, to come and see, to engage positively with us, and the same apply for other faith groups.
Thank you, Rifat. There is another question about what can Christians in contexts like India, where many young Israeli travel after military service, do to help those individuals reckon with accountability for what is happening to Palestinians?
To whom is that? To me or?
It's a question to the panelists in the Q&A.
Take it, Rifat.
Okay. I mean, we have very solid groups in India supporting the Palestinian rights, and they are doing huge work there. We should also notice that there is a very special relations between current government of India and the government of Israel. I think they both have the same racist roots in dealing with their inhabitants, with their, I mean, in India, but also here in Palestine. When I visit India, I see all the time this connection and similarities, even sometimes in oppression. So I think we need to have a louder voice in India, although we do encourage and we do appreciate the voices in India. But India was all the time a very close friend to the Palestinians. They were at the forefront defending the Palestinian rights, and we hope India will come to that level of assistance and solidarity with the Palestinians. There is something very important Indians can do, which is to work on arm embargo, because India have very strong ties with Israel, exporting arms and importing arms. So arm embargo is something very important. Today also India, they are one of the first countries to send workers to work inside Israel to replace the Palestinian cheap laborers there. So there are many things which can be done in India to educate, to alert people about the suffering of the Palestinians, about racism, and to make, I mean, similarity to clarify the similarities between the context in India and the context in Israel.
Thank you, Rifat. There is a question about, and I think this will be the last question due to time constraints of the webinar. So there is a question about how do you recommend we respond to the severe economic aspect of the occupation? My understanding is that prices are really high and income is very low. While we work long term on the roots of the occupation, what can the international community do in the short term to offer economic mutual aid?
Maybe the mayor can answer this.
Yes, I'll do my best. We're having two initiatives of 60 workers, of people that can't work nowadays. We are having two initiatives. We started the first one nowadays and the other one in 3 months. Try to have people that can't afford and they don't have anything to do nowadays due to the lack of tourism and to the lack of farming. So we have two initiatives. First one started nowadays, and the other one is in 3 months to give them a chance to work. 60 people each time. Of course, we're open to any kind of initiatives you can help with to help us give the people more chance to stay here. As I said, the economic problems nowadays is becoming more and more severe. So we're doing our best, and we ask God to help us in any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have come to the end of our webinar today, but I hope that this conversation will really be the start of setting things in motion for people who have known more about the settlement expansion now and are wondering what they can do. There are a lot of people who are asking of resources and what information can be shared, and we will make sure to really share what the previous weeks of the campaign have highlighted in terms of documentations about the Ush Ghurab situation, but also we will also share all the WCRC and the panelist documentation that they have shared with the people in the statement tomorrow. I really want to begin by simply saying thank you to all our brilliant panelists today for grounding really this conversation in the lived reality of their context, of their everyday lives, but also for their courageous advocacy and for speaking truth to power. Would like to thank Rifat. I would like to thank the mayor, Laith Qumsieh. I would like to thank Munther and to thank Dalia for really their courageous witness and for speaking truth to power in this important webinar. We have heard today it's not really easy to hold, but we have heard about land being swallowed, not suddenly, but systematically and methodologically. And as we have heard clearly and without ambiguity, what the global church is being asked to, not to issue another statement, but to speak really truth without false symmetry, to pressure government and to apply the international law consistently without double standards. The WCRC will continue to walk alongside our partners and our Palestinian Christian brothers and sisters. And this really webinar is just a continuation of the accompanying work that the WCRC will continue to do for the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. So thank you for the panelists again, and thank you for the participation of people and being engaged in this important webinar as part of accompanying our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening and day.
Thank you.